So I'm going to offer a few words to help us start a conversation together, right? And the conversation that we're going to focus on, that I'm going to open up at least with you all, is the role that queerness, and in particular, a queer politic, has and offers us right now as a way to understand the world, as a way to assess what is happening, and a way to build a winning liberatory strategy to get us to ultimately a queer future. Now, a few words just about that quickly. So this conversation will be layered, right? Some of us will be speaking from the place of identity experience. We ask that folks bring this. I'm also inviting all of us, regardless of your identity and how you're positioned in regards to gender and sexual orientation, I am inviting all of us to take on the work and the project of understanding how our identities are used as social categories of power. I am challenging all of us to be willing to break binaries. I am challenging all of us to be willing to break up with cis heteropatriarchy and to confront these systems of power toward liberation. And I think as a queer leader, that is everyone's responsibility, regardless of how you're positioned around your personal, around your individual sexual orientation and or gender. So I think we have a unique opportunity in front of us. As terrible as this time is as open as this time is. And so we are continuing to see unprecedented crises around climate and environmental harms that humans have done, that have created several disasters that our folks are experiencing and surviving. The novel coronavirus still continues to be an issue. We're seeing the fall of protections that folks have fought hard for, such as Roe v. Wade. Simultaneously, we are also seeing representation in ways that we haven't seen in contemporary society. Turn on the TV, there's a gay person there, right? Turn on the radio, there's a gay person there. Go to the local store, there's a gay ad there. So at the same time, we're seeing representation that is creating openings for some people to begin to have conversations about LGBTQ issues. But we on this call, we are revolutionaries. We're people who are thinking about world making, right? And we are not people who settle for representation alone. And so I'm inviting all of us to be in a conversation, to think critically about what does it mean to have a queer politic, to see the world and not just binaries, to be expansive in our thinking. And as C. Riley Snorton talks about, for many of us as Black folks to understand ourselves in a swamp, in a perpetual state of making and unmaking, seeing and not seeing, being and not being. And I think there's potential there. I think those spaces create the opening for us to build new ways of being together, for us to become something, right, that we've never been, for ways for us to understand issues in different ways, for us to propose solutions that have been unseen. And I think that is the potential of radical queer feminist organizing. And so I invite that thinking, and we're going to open up the space shortly for folks who are going to be bringing that thinking and addressing the questions of what is a queer politic and what it means now. How do we movement build based on that politic? And then based on that understanding as a movement scientist, what is possible now? And so I'll pass it over to, is it just us two, or we have another person with us, Frank? Well, I'll pass it to you.
Gracias. Y yo voy a decir una cuanta palabrita.
Thank you. And I'm going to say a few words that are joining us with what you just said, Em, and that's going to help us to keep thinking about why having this conversation at this moment and how we want to have it, because I am completely in agreement that we have to think about a queer politic. And I'm also thinking about queer in the way as like how people live their day-to-day life, because there's a lot of people that like right now there's like, oh, it's basically the fashion to be queer. It's fashion to be queer. Oh, I have this queer politic. It's like, oh, I eat queer. Like my food is queer. It's like, what the fuck? What are you saying? Like, it's a word that people are using it a lot, but it loses sense. It loses its meaning. So I think for me and my friend circle and my community, we say there's some people that are still the type of queer that could kill you because you're queer, because of how you're living your life day to day, or who you're holding hands with. you can get killed in the streets because you have to think very well where you go, what are you gonna wear. So that's the type of queerness that we're talking about. So we're talking about a queer politic, but we're also talking about a queer life and that people that identify as LGBTQI plus. And I say because even the word queer, visibilization is important, and the language that we use and the words that we use are important. But there's a lot of places that that this word queer is not used, and it's a debate because queer could be seen as very academic, and people that we are using it, or when we go to our origin to countries of origin or to certain communities, they tell us like, oh, the people that are using those words are the people that have learned that in the United States. So how is also centering a certain experiences? So when I go to the Dominican Republic, it's like, oh, don't call me queer, call me pata, call me maricona, I'm a lesbian, call me as I am. So it's very interesting to even like to see like how even the same the word and the queer politic and how we're and tying it to language justice. So it's something that I wanted to amplify, and also wanted to join with that reality, day-to-day reality with this politic that we're talking, that is also very important and necessary, because for me, queer is to bring what's not there. That's for me existing in this in non-binary, in this world that says we do not want we don't want to be only one thing, we want to be everything at the same time. And so it's always looking in the spaces that we're organizing, what is it that's missing, what's needed. And so I think in ways that people have opened, yes, specifically about sexuality and gender, but also with religion, with the ways, all the ways that people are using that queer politic to say, look, oh, I am bringing what's missing. And that's also something that gives me the chills, because is the risk that we've been getting, people that are that queer organizers for a long time with our own existence, that now and from a long time ago, it's getting more and more visibilized in our organizing spaces. But we also have to be careful with capitalism, that when it's seen, it's only to mock or whatever can bring money. So I think about that specifically in the way that I look trans women, for example, that if they're amplified, it's for entertainment and they're not taking them seriously, and or only when they can make money to someone else. And so that for me is part of this conversation. What are we bringing? What's the context? And what's I'm not gonna say the conflict, but the tension in the way that we're living this queer politic on a day-to-day, and the way that it's a theory that could be applied to many situations. So I'm very excited to have this conversation in community that I think is needed, and that I know that we're having it in a lots of ways in our own bodies, in our communities, and with our peoples. I don't know if you have to add anything else, Em, and I know that even you're gonna pass the mic to someone else, because there's other people that are gonna be part of this conversation. So I'll pass it back to you, Em.
Thanks. So I'll just add on a comment that I think what you're saying is just so incredibly important. And then we have some folks who are going to join this fishbowl with us, and we're excited to hear their intelligence and brilliance on this issue. I think what you're saying is so important around being clear about what is the politic that we're asking people to have, and then what are people's lived realities, and who has the greater proximity to violence. So what we're seeing all over is we're seeing, I mean, this is spot on. We're seeing, and I think due to capitalism and neoliberalism, right, we're seeing a proliferation of language, of option, of perceived choice, and people are seeing that as queer advancement alone. But really, that's not. It's just an opportunity to say a lot of things. And I think there's space there and room there for us to use in our organizing work. But that alone is not liberation, right? And I blame white LGBT leadership for that, right? For thinking that language adjustments were enough, for only dealing with what appears to be liberal solutions to very real, violent, and tragic violence is against folks who have a greater proximity of violence. And I think what you're saying is so important, because my training and understanding and my choosing to think of myself as a radical Black queer feminist materialist is connected to those realities, right? So there is no queer politic that doesn't seriously deal with those most harmed, those most marginalized, folks most impacted, those body stories, lives, and histories. And so I do think we have to reject this neoliberal, liberal approach to queer liberation that says it is just language changes alone, that says it is bathrooms only, that says it is gay marriage alone. And I am not dissing any of those advancements. I've been part of fighting for those things, and I'm married and all of those things, right? And I believe those things should exist, but those things without some of these bigger material shifts just leaves what we have now, which is a bunch of people get representation. Some people get mic time. Some people are sought and seen, but the material lives of Black trans women are still just as precarious, or the material realities of Black studs and gender nonconforming people and Black lesbians and Indigenous two-spirited folks, et cetera, are experiencing just as much violence and harm as they did before those interventions. So I think what you're saying is so important. And with that point, I think we should open up and bring in our folks. We're going to talk more about those perspectives.
Perfecto, entonces invitamos a les
Perfect. So
gente.
we're inviting the people that have said yes. Thank you for saying yes to you and joining this conversation. I think sometimes the names that you have on Zoom don't necessarily adjust, are adjust with the names that we called you. But if at this moment, if we can highlight a spotlight, there we go. Some people are coming forward. Kalayo, Matice, Gia. I'm looking at my notes. I think there's someone missing.
Invitation to
There's someone-
Aneiry
The
to also
invitation
come
to
into.
Aneiry to also come.
Perfecto. Aneiry, perfecto.
Perfect.
Bueno.
Maybe perfect. Okay. Thank you for saying yes. Not just this time, but I feel this is people that are saying yes more than once and every time. And I thank y'all for always wanting to share your wisdom. It's something that, yeah, is very important for us and for our community. So thank you very much. And you know that the question, well, the conversation, in a whole, that you can join however you feel more comfortable, and that you feel like that you're excited to join in this. And the specific questions for these conversations have to do with exactly what we're talking about, not just visibilization, but leadership. How how do we follow the leadership? What we can learn and know about this queer politic. And so for you, in the way that you feel called to, the question is, what's a queer politic for you, and what does it mean now and today in this moment in this world, knowing that this world is a lot and the things shift a lot, in this moment that we're living in? What is a queer politic for you, and what does it mean for this present moment, and do we re- how do we how do we create a movement based on that politic? How do we inform the type of movements that we create? And so I invite y'all. We can go in an order, and in the order that's in my screen, or is someone that's super excited to share and to begin? Are you speaking, Aneiry?
No, okay.
No? Okay. You're talking about now we're us. And so Gia, you're the first person in my screen, then Matice, then Kalayo, then Aneiry. And if you wanna go in that order, it's okay. But please go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Heidi, and thanks, Em, for
The-
kicking us off. I really appreciate this conversation. Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation. One of the conversations that I feel is just like necessary and just in my mind, it's almost a matter of fact in terms of like, this is just what we need to talk about in order to move forward as movements. For me, the queer politic, I think from what I remember, even growing up, and also be like, for context, I had like a late, quote unquote, late diagnosis of ADHD and like treatment. So for like the first 23 years of my life, I wasn't treated. So I feel like my neurodivergence really, even before I knew what was up with my brain, it really got in the way in terms of like how I connected with others, how I explained like what I needed, or what I felt, what I wanted. So I coped with how I needed to. And for myself, as like a neurodivergent person, as a young girl who was like exploring my gender, and also my family was homeless for about 6 years when I was in a middle school and high school. So like being poor definitely impacts what's going on in my brain and what's going on with my gender. But I think all that combined, I can say it forced me, I can say it invited me, but I think what I learned from my experience and my dedication to, I think, wanting to be happy, really feeling lost and not connected to myself, but wanting the peace that I was told magically might, be possible. So me just following that, not being able to remember a lot, right? Part of my neurodivergence is like my memory was really bad. I couldn't even like join conversations and explain my queerness. I was just like, I don't even know. Like, I don't even know how to, I don't even know. And it wasn't enough for people. People were like, people wanted more. When I started to present femininely in high school, and I was saying I was a girl, but I maybe didn't look like a girl, people wanted more explanation. And I was like, I don't have more explanation. I'm picking the clothes I want. I'm doing what I want. And it sounds really like naive and it sounds really simple, but it always felt true. So I think growing up, that my queer politic became me really doing the work of listening to like, what does my body say I need? What are those little voices that are still freaking like not letting me go and like eating my conscious as I try to like switch my code or whatever? And I think what it came down to, what I feel like I'm settling into, is that for me, my transness and my queerness and my queer politic, like all that shit really is just like my adamant choice to give it a little space before I choose anything, right? Not feeling forced to have to like do what I do or respond in what people are expecting me. And for myself, like slowing down, giving myself some choice, some space choice. I think from therapy to like my fucking scholar, like my classwork to like my work, I think just giving myself space and choice has been that little amount of freedom to show me that fuck yeah, I was right. I can go for what my body needs. I can do that shit and it feels good. And maybe people are gonna be shitty for like to me about it, right? Like I don't think my queerness has always been like the most welcoming part of me. I don't know. People code it and like, code it with whatever kind of like other things they're bringing in. But for me, queer politic is about choice, and it's about granting myself that choice that I was born with, but I didn't really know. And I wasn't really taught. I don't blame my mom. I don't know if she was taught all her choice. But together, I think we're learning. So that's a little where my queerness is born into and has formed.
And Matice, I know that you've done a lot of work around liberating masculinities and building off of what Gia just talked about this autonomy, right? So how we as radical queer folks are fighting for autonomy, right? Which is choice plus. So can you talk more about your work and how it shapes or is built from your understanding of a queer politic, right? Talk to us more about your liberating masculinities.
Thank you for that invitation. Gia, thank you for getting us started with such a beautiful share. And I related so much of it, right? I think that I came into this work around masculinity, questioning my identity, questioning this energy I had within myself, and also how to, be with myself and be with other people in a way that felt more ethical and aligned than what was modeled for me. And now, you know, with the folks that I am working with on a regular basis, we're in this space of like defining what a queer politic is within this realm of masculinity. And so we've been talking about liberatory masculinity as a practice, as a set of values, and that, you know, really, you know, is an emergent lifelong practice and commitment in a sense, like not something that you ever like arrive to and are finished with. And also, you know, like what are the ways in which we have to really reconcile with the binary and binary thinking within ourselves and in our relationships, you know, if we're going to practice liberating masculinity and, you know, like liberating our folks. And so as part of that, you know, we've been having more conversations in terms of like our queer politic hinging on rejecting a separation from femininity as part of the process of liberating masculinity. We've been talking about how do we recondition our egos to reject patriarchy and or to reject the inner dominator. And in doing so, you know, like how much of that really requires centering a restorative love practice, you know, like both with yourself and with all the people that you're in relationship with on a regular basis, right? And in community. And, you know, then of course, under all of that, the need for regular and consistent political education. You know, like we have a lot of folks within our community who are increasingly identifying as gender expansive, as non-binary, and as such, you know, like myself included, like wanting to reject our relationship to masculinity, to patriarchy, and also recognizing that, you know, like as we explore more and more gender expansiveness, you know, like there is still a need to definitely engage politically, personally with patriarchy as it is internally manifested and as it, you know, is exercised in our interpersonal relationships. And so I think that that is how we're currently trying to queer our politic and define the ways in which we're trying to liberate masculinity.
That's great. That's incredible. And I want to I'm going to build off of something you said and offer a position. Folks can disagree or agree or disagree. You know, get me together. I'm for it. So, you know, one of the things that you said, Matice, that I think is important is this going against patriarchy, right? Like on purpose, we are going to break up. We are going to disavow, and we're going to challenge patriarchy. And patriarchy is a system of oppression, right? So there's power inside of it. So one of the things that I think is important about our queer politic is that it's an assertion of power. So I often stay away from words like choice and options, because that's individual, right? And being Black, being gender nonconforming, female assigned, dark skin, fat, ... My quest for queer liberation is a direct struggle for power. So I think about concepts like Gia said, I think about concepts of autonomy. I think about concepts of determination because they require and they center a pathway to power. And so I'm curious, Kalayo, as I come to you, what you think about that and what's your position in your work and ... all of that with queer politics. Where you at in this?
Ooh, I see you're bringing that juice. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just so honored to be part of this conversation with you all today. Yeah, I'm taking that in. You know, I think that there's a lot to that. I definitely am also of the queer politic of really like dismantling what we have so that our material conditions can really like rise to the level that, you know, it needs to be for our people to thrive. And, you know, I'm Kalayo, I use they pronouns. I'm with API Chaya, and I'm also a founding member of Queer the Land, both on Duwamish land in Seattle. And I also actually want to speak, you know, a little bit to how Queer the Land came to be, because essentially, you know, a lot of us were part of different organizations. And I think it's important that like organizations can like lift up, you know, queerness and queer leadership, but not actually directly support like the improvement of our lives, right? Like not actually support when many of us are in situations of like housing that is like in proximity to violence, in proximity to always getting like shut down. When we do, want to access or accessing power. And also this idea that like, our livelihoods, like we are like sacrificing ourselves to be in these positions of leadership, yet it has nothing for our future, right? Like our futures are not cared for. And so, for the land, many of us were like, oh, we like been in the movement for like 10, 15 years. And, like many of us, queer folks don't have kids or don't have kids till later. And so it's just like taken into, what do you call it? Like people take it for granted you're just gonna be like give your whole life to this, right? But actually like what we want is to be able to dream, to be able to have families, to be able to like have some nice things. And part of that is really having power over the resources, right? And so essentially like what we've had to do and really fight for is having something of our own. So for Queer the Land, that looks like having our own home, that that we can cultivate the land, that we can invite people to, that we can grow our families, grow our movement into, and that gives us a way to really lift up our material conditions, right? Being able to offer resources for ourselves and for our people. So that's a little bit about how I come into, this queer politic, like that it's not enough that we're, like seen as like leaders of organizations if there is no like real future for us other than continuing to work, till we're old and gray. Like I'm trying to be in the golden hour with you all, enjoying life. And I know you feel that, Aneiry, so I wanna hear from you about how you're feeling about this conversation, and how you're feeling about being in the movement, getting power right now.
Hola a todos, Aneiry Zapata.
Hello, everybody. Aneiry Zapata, feminine pronouns. I am part of ELMB, and I want you to know that I had never been as nervous as I am in this conversation. This conversation has really made me think ever since I read the questions this morning. My mind has been going all over the place here in the room, and I've been consulting with my husband. How can I talk about this? Because there's so many ideas that are inside my head, and I didn't know how to pull them out. But I think that you have helped me to do this. For me, queer politics is the inclusion, not explain, because a lot of times what I feel is that, like Gia was saying before, we want a lot of explanations about the lives of people. And not just about their lives, but we want to have, like something to learn about what's happening in their bedrooms, what's going on. And no, you can't be a top if you can't be trans, all of this. And so they put a lot of rules, stupid rules that don't allow us to fully be included. So for me, to be able to live and to not have to explain why my body has this characteristic, or why I walk a certain way, or why I talk a certain way. A lot of times when I've been posting videos, giving some speeches, I've had comments about you should have a softer voice. And I say, no, it's not, and it can't be a softer voice. And I believe that when we talk about the body, sometimes there are, it's not just the patriarchy, but within our own communities, we have competitions. Oftentimes, us transgender women are attacked from other transgender women, so who's looking more feminine and who doesn't, and who is dressing this way, and who has the best boyfriend. And I say, oh my God, this is about inclusivity. we're not trying to, we're not making space for everybody in this. So once we start talking about the immigration system of undocumented people, for example, I am undocumented. Before I was really afraid to say this, but now I can say it. Yes, I am undocumented. And a lot of times people that have documents and are part of the community, they see us in a deplorable way, or sometimes they even, there's this kind of like this false pity that is created. And I've talked previously in some spaces where I didn't want to be there because I said I spoke with the directors because I felt like they were feeling this false pity because I didn't feel like they were talking from the reality, from the real understanding of why we are here. Why did we cross the border? And what we are trying to get from the United States. And when they don't understand that, and when they're not trying to understand that, I feel that it's false pity. I'm not going to be in that space. I am not going to share what I have to say with those people. But these are the people that have power a lot of times. And these are the people that are talking on our behalf and representing what they don't know, but they're representing us. So it's sort of like a mix up in our heads because should I be part of this thing or should I not? And like Kalayo was saying, we also have this space so that we can dream, so that we can rest. I always say, because Aneiry, I don't want to work all my life. I want to be able to have that space to enjoy, to be home, to say, okay, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be at peace. I don't see myself, shouting out in a courtroom. I want that the court know that us queer people exist, that they know that we're here and that we be included whenever there are changes that are being made in the reforms, but that we don't have to go and stand out there. I don't want my children in 10, 20 years have to go and stand and shout, hey, include me. I want them to know that they're here and that they deserve to be included because it's when I talk about inclusivity and queer politics, I'm addressing the appropriate inclusion so that everybody can be included, whether we have a beer or not, whether we let our, armpits hair grows out or not. All of us need to be included so that we can all have that safe space for all of us.
Bastante gracias, tan poderoso, porque lo que yo estoy
Thank you so
oyendo
much. How
también es que
powerful, because what I'm
alguna gente
hearing
no está
too
haciendo los mismos
is that
errores que dijo
we're
Emma
kind
antes,
of doing
que
those
hay este
same mistakes that
movimiento que es que
Em said before, that there's
uno
this movement where
pelea y
we're fighting
trata de
and we're
obtener
trying
poder de la
to
manera
get
que
power
la
from
blanquedad, el
the
sistema
way
dice que
that the
está
whiteness,
bien,
the
como que
system
tenemos una
says
orden.
we should do, like we
Vamos a
have
votar
an
gente
order.
primero y después un día
These
llega tu
people will go
liberación. Y
first,
lo
and
que
then
estoy oyendo
one
que de
day your
diferentes
liberation will
formas se están
happen.
diciendo es que
So what
no
I'm
vamos a hacer
hearing
esos
is
errores y
that
cuando vemos que
we're
lo
not
estamos
going to be
haciendo,
making these
estamos
mistakes. And when we
reflejando
see
y
that we're
tratando de
making these
cambiar de
mistakes, we're
curso
going to be
para no
reflecting
seguir
about it and
haciendo la
trying to
misma
change
cosa
course
que
so
no
that
ha
we
funcionado
don't
para
do the same
nosotros,
thing
sino
that
no
has not been
incluyes a
working for us.
todos. Así que
And that's
bastante
to
gracias por
include
las
everybody. So
diferentes
thank you
maneras
so
en que
much
hoy que cada
for
uno
the
de ustedes
different
están
ways that all
haciendo
of you
ese
have
punto y que
shared
están
about
viviendo ese punto.
how you
Y
live that
también sabemos que queríamos tener esta conversación
action.
porque esta
And we also knew that we wanted to
política
have this
queer,
conversation because this
sabemos
queer
que no son la
politic,
gente que se
we know
identifican
that there aren't just
personalmente
people
como
that
queer,
personally identify
es
as
una cosa
queer,
que esperamos
but it's
que
something that we
puedan
hope
practicar ni
that
levantar.
they can
Es para
practice
todos,
and elevate. It's for
es parte
everybody.
de ser inclusive, ¿no? Es
Speaking
algo
of
que
being
esperamos
inclusive, it's
que
something
la
that we
gente pueda
hope
decir,
that
ok, ¿de qué
people can
manera
say,
existe en mi
okay,
vida? ¿De qué
how
manera
is
no
it manifesting in my
existe?
life or
¿Cómo se
not?
está realizando en mi
How is it
organización? ¿Cómo no?
being
¿Con
seen in
quién me
my
estoy uniendo?
organization
¿Cómo
or
no?
not?
Y
Who am I
queremos
connecting
coger
with
este
or
momento
not?
para
And we
que
want to
todos
take this
podamos
moment so
reflejar
that
en esa
all of us can
pregunta, porque
reflect
no
on that
queremos salir de ese
question
espacio
because
sin
we don't
entonces
want to
para
be
esto seguir
leaving
como
this
una
space
teoría,
so that this
sino
can
para que
continue as a
sea, como
theory.
dijo Matice, una
But as Matice said,
práctica de
so that it
valores.
becomes a
Entonces vamos a
value of
coger
practice or practice
unos
of
cuantos
values. So
minutitos,
let's
vamos a
take a
poner
few
esas
minutes.
preguntas en el
We're going
chat
to
para
put those
recordarles de
questions
eso,
in the
pero
chat
es
to remind you what the question is. But it's
como está diciendo Imara en el chat
as
ahora
Mara is
mismo,
saying on the
en lo que
chat right
está
now,
profundamente
that what is profoundly at the center of the queer politics is the notion that it should be for everybody without any conditions or limits. What are the politics of what is possible? So let's join ourselves to that, to the examples that have been given. We want to take a few minutes so that you can ask yourself that question. How am I deepening my work in this queer politic? Even if you are doing it, there's always something that you can do that you could say, in everything that I've been doing, these are some things that haven't been that great, maybe at the edges of my work. So what is the type of leadership that I follow that is queer, trans, non-binary? And how does my job reinforces and supports the movements that exist? So Laurel, let me tell you to please ask you to please put a song for 1 or 2 minutes so that we can do that reflection on our own. And when we come back, and I see Mara, you have your hand raised up. Let's bring in more people to this conversation after maybe like a short minute so that people can really reflect on that. About the conversation that we've had and the question. And afterwards, we're going to ask that more people join this conversation.
Okay, que demos la oportunidad para que la gente que sabemos que
We want to give a chance for the people, for those that we know that don't like it or don't like talking in big groups, for those that would like to go and talk in pairs, and we would like to welcome Imara to join this conversation.
Yeah, okay. So let me just lower my hand. Thank you so much for this conversation. Mara Bailey always says that in every conversation that she knows that at some point I'm going to ask what the purpose is. And it's true. And I think that one of the things that is really important about a queer politics is defining what a queer political vision is, right? What is a queer political vision? And a queer political vision inherently is a politics that's grounded in the idea that it's everybody included or it's nobody, that there are no limitations upon who matters. There's no limitations upon who can be included. There's no limitations upon the idea of political power and political relevance in society. That's at the core of a queer politics. And that's why it's inherently anti-patriarchal. The exact opposite of a patriarchal vision, which is grounded in hierarchy, right? So it's the opposite of a patriarchal vision, is a queer political vision. Because a queer political vision, a patriarchal political vision is grounded in trade-offs, is grounded in the idea that certain people have to go first. Certain people matter more than others. We can do certain things for certain people now and then make others wait. When we know that when politics is practiced that way, that inherently that's grounded in the idea and the reality that nothing's really going to change. Because we can arc out the advances between certain groups of people to the point that patriarchy is able to adapt and maintain itself. And so a queer politics is the exact opposite. And that's why it's so incredibly hard. And that's why it's not practiced. Because it's the exact opposite of the way our political system is set up. It's the exact opposite of the way in which, even in ways that people are not aware, everyone in a certain way is practicing patriarchy. So, Aneiry, when you were talking about people in the various communities to which you belong, right? Trans communities or immigrant communities, that to the degree that people are creating a hierarchy over who matters, that is an inherent reinforcement of patriarchy and patriarchal values. And it's really extremely hard. And it's so often why our movements fail, is because we end up replicating the politics of the thing that we're trying to destroy. And it happens everywhere, right? So the work of creating a queer politics is extremely difficult work. It is beyond the right words, it's beyond performance, it's beyond all of the things that we do as humans to telegraph that we're doing the right thing. It's the exact opposite of that. And it's inherently, queer politics aren't inherently trans vision. Because the modern notion of what queer politics are grounded in trans visions of what the world needs to be. And I can say that because, as many people know, but not everyone, the modern fight, and I mean modern 1969 with Stonewall, I believe, fight for LGBTQ rights started with Black and brown trans people. That's who started Stonewall. Those are the people that organized the first march, Pride March, to commemorate the action they had taken the year before. Right? So the vision of even that there is a different political vision for people who are not straight and not cis, that's not grounded in patriarchy, is the vision of trans people, and specifically poor Black and brown trans people. Because it's the vision of how we can remake society. The vision for how you can mentally remake society in a way that works for everybody. And that queer political vision, that trans political vision, was deliberately hijacked. In 1974, when white gay men took over the march and various, and this legacy of Stonewall, and deliberately pushed Sylvia and Star and all the drag queens that had organized and trans people that had organized the first march deliberately out. It was a deliberate act. There was nothing that was subtle about it. There was nothing that was accidental about it. There was nothing about it that was just the way things went. It was intentional and it was violent, and Sylvia never recovered from it from the rest of her life. And so therefore, the reason why the idea of queer politics replicates patriarchy is because fundamentally patriarchy hijacked it. Patriarchy hijacked the idea of queer politics, which is why people find it hard to articulate what a queer political vision is. Because it got taken off of its mooring. And why it's so easy to, when we talk about queer politics, to have it sound like it is, you know, regular political life and regular political vision, when it's the exact opposite. So that we have to understand and ground ourselves in the radicalness of queer politics and in the difficulty of queer politics and in the way in which it is grounded in centering the people who were most excluded. That's its power. Right? And the degree to which we do not articulate that power, that ground those roots, honor those roots, and return to them as often as possible is the degree to which queer politics will continue to be lost. That's how you have a queer politics that can, you know, say that what I believe that the marriage fight was important because it was a fight that was picked by the right. Sometimes in life, you don't get to pick the fights pick you, so you have to fight them. That's fine. But what I do reject is the fact that 90% of all money that has ever been raised for LGBTQ movements since 1969 were raised in 5 years for gay marriage. And the minute gay marriage was won, all that money walked out the door and all that support because they said that the fight was over. That's not a queer political vision. And so that is the struggle. And if, you know, the degree to which you believe in a world without patriarchy, queer politics and the origins of queer politics and the reality of queer politics are things that you must inherently embrace, or your vision of a world without patriarchy will never be possible. That's what's radical about queer politics, right? And that's the work. So that even if you are cis, but you want a world without patriarchy, you have to embrace a radical queer political vision. And that's hard because you live in a society in which in every way it tells you that political life is the exact opposite. And that's why it's hard. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thanks, Imara. Am I good to jump in? Yeah, so. But you know, to Imara's point, and also to your question around like, is a queer politic for everyone? I'm also curious if a queer politic is not just the opposite of patriarchy, but something just totally under that shit. Like, I wonder if when I think of queer politic, I think of I don't know who or where I heard this from, but the idea of the universe is in love with itself, and the universe is a bunch of reactions and actions of things that follow its like potential and like, you know, connect versus like not connect. And I think that has informed, or has like validated the beauty I see in the world, and the beauty of like, not just the beauty of nature, but also like the science of nature and the love and the hot passion of nature that has allowed life to happen. I think from there, I think about a conversation that we had, I think at one of the last convenings around, if we're trying to replace capitalism, a system with power and dollar bills as currency, the new system that we're trying to create, what is that currency if it's not going to be power, if it's not going to be money? And I think we were playing around with like, is it love? Is it connection? Is it life? Right? There's like the value of life. Is that the new currency of a system that could actually like sustain people? So I'm just wondering if because when I think of queer politics, I don't even think about naturally like humans. I can even dehumanize a queer politic and talk about like, how can I follow life that supports life even beyond humans, right? Even beyond myself as self, myself as self. I can't even say it, but like literally, like how do I think of other things other than people? And that's where I'm like, what if queer politics is not just the opposite of like patriarchy? What if it's like the sustained practice of life? And I think if it's that, then I don't think we can lose it, TBH. I think we could be manipulated and tortured and all that shit over and over for centuries, but there is something in our bodies that tell us how to go forward toward life. And I've tried to lose it, but I can't. And I have faith that that's queer politics, because that I think is easier to explain to my kid that he already has queer politics, that he already is free, and like he doesn't need to learn anything else other than following what his body is telling him, which is definitely the opposite of capitalism, the opposite of patriarchy.
Is that
Creo que iba.
Okay, I've got some questions. Thank you for those comments. I have some questions and maybe some different. So please feel free to directly respond. And maybe this is the part where it opens up to other folks to join in with us. So just two questions or thoughts. So the queer politic for everybody, I have questions about, not because I disagree with the sentiment, but I have questions about the strategy and what that means in a world where people are not horizontal. I think queer politic requires abolition of things, right? It doesn't say everything can exist, right? I don't think it's all inclusive. It is saying directly, carceral systems have to fall down. Bodyguards of carceral systems have to fall down. I think whiteness as a social identity is a bodyguard of carceral systems. I think whiteness is a bodyguard of patriarchy, right? Whiteness is what it is because it and patriarchy was getting down. And capitalism, then here we are, we have this version of whiteness that we're fighting against. And so, not to get all like, abstract or whatever, well, not too abstract, though I can nerd out, geek out about this. But what I'm trying to get at is I think part of our challenge in building meaningful coalitions or building broad-based queer feminist movements, et cetera, is that it's actually that we're not horizontal. So this inclusion practice, I think it ends up fucking us up. Because here we are trying to be one, not one, but you get what I'm saying. We trying to be in it together, but we're actually not positioned that way. And some of our social positioning and those identities are inherently violent against us. And so I do think it requires the destruction of some of these identities as we know it. It challenges our concepts of race. I don't think if we win this queer liberation, you can't be white at the end of that, because whiteness is antithetical to queer liberation in my assessment and understanding. It's antithetical to Black liberation. It's antithetical to so many things because of how it's constructed as a social category of power. That doesn't mean everybody gonna be as melanated as me. That would be nice, but that don't mean it's gonna happen. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about social categories of identity. Some of them are designed to be inherently violent. That's what the categorization is, right? Racialization is violent, gendering is violent. Socializing people to be these major identity markers are violent processes. So I think it requires the destruction of some of it. And the other part, Gia, which is a question for you, is something I find myself challenged in this movement moment, is some essentialist behavior. So I see people who have identities and they're like, because I got this identity, I know. Or because I got this identity, it is right what I'm saying. Like, I'm gay, therefore, if you don't get down with what I'm saying, it's homophobic. And I reject that. I actually think we need more than our experiences to guide us. Because if it was our love and passion alone, we would have fucking won. There's nobody more loving and passionate than my grandma. Like, I seriously think that. She would have freed us, you know what I mean? But we didn't. So it does require some of this other stuff. So I'm just had some differences, had some reactions, seeing if anybody in the chat's gonna jump in. And come on, Mara, get me together. All right, I see your hand up.
Well, I would never get you together. I would just engage you in additional conversation. I think just to answer the points that you were mentioning, you have to be very careful about the idea that our goal is to destroy things. That doesn't mean that we're not emphasizing that there has to be fundamental change in which certain structures will dissolve and go away. That sounds like it's a subtle difference, but I think a really important one, and here's why. I think we have to be articulating what we are for and what that world looks like for two reasons. One, political change comes from countless individual decisions by millions of people over time. And I think that everyone has to understand what a queer political vision is for them, and they have to figure out the hundreds of individual choices they're going to make in their lives about how to make that happen. From where they live, to where they shop, to who they associate with, to what they support, to what they give their money to. Like, it's an expansive thing of all these individual choices, right? Because fundamentally, the swell of individual choices creates the environment for the radical change that we are looking for. So first, articulating this is what a queer political vision is, and then having people figure out what they're going to do in their small individual choices all the time to make that happen, I think is really important. And that has to just be a positive vision. I don't mean positive as in like upbeat, I mean positive as in affirming something that they can see. The second thing is, the reason why I have to say that I don't want to lead with destruction, like we're going to destroy this, we're going to destroy that, we're going to whatever. Although those things need to go away. It's not even in question. The reason why is because, I've spent one of the things I did during the pandemic was I spent basically a year really doing a deep dive into the French Revolution, of doing a deep dive into how you go from an absolute medieval monarchy to a republic, to a radical republic that then ends in empire and then goes back to monarchy. Like, what is that failure, right? And fundamentally, one of the reasons why they ended up where they started is because they only knew what they were trying to destroy. And that once they destroyed it, there was no affirmative vision for what they were trying to build. And so they ultimately just recreated what they had destroyed. And so to lead with, we're trying to destroy the list. And we all know what the list is, right? It's one of the things that I spoke about in Puerto Rico. Like, we can all say the 10 things that we are fundamentally against. The hard part is saying what we are for, because that's ultimately what we're trying to create. If we only say what we're trying to destroy, that's ultimately what we're going to end up creating. And that's going to be destruction. We have to have a affirming view of what we are trying to build, right? And so I think that when you say a world without incarceration, what we mean when we say that we want a world without incarceration is that we want a world where people's living isn't criminalized, right? And where people can thrive. That's actually the world that we're trying to build. We're not just trying to destroy jails. And we're not just trying to get away with police. There's an affirmative vision that we have. So I really want us collectively, when we talk about these things, to really be affirming over and over and over the world that we're trying to create behind the ideas that we have of what we're trying to destroy. And that's why I think I articulated it in the way that I did about a queer politic, because ultimately for it to be realized, it has to be for everyone. We occupy this space, we occupy this land, and there's going to have to be a way in which we bring that vision about collectively. And that's what's radical, and that's what's hard, and that's why it's a vision that's even beyond our lifetimes. So that would just be my kind of corollary to your question.
Algunas veces cuando se planean esta agenda,
Sometimes when you plan these agendas, it's like, oh, 20 minutes for this conversation, and then we're finished with the conversation. It's like, oh my God, only 20 minutes, 90 minutes? That went so fast. So I just want to say that even though this conversation we're having it in 90 minutes, the good thing about it is that we've been creating this community for more than a decade, but with this brilliant community that where we can have these conversations that is not just in theory, but are translating into how people are living their lives and practicing in their communities and their organizations, which is the part that I am very in love with this community for, because people can sit and have this conversation until they turn blue. But then what are we doing? How things are shifting, how the material conditions are shifting for our people, and more the people more marginalized and affected by systems of oppression. So thank you very much for all the people here are living it through and are embodying it. So I also wanted to say that what I'm seeing in the chat, thank you, Alexis, for example, that is taking us to this last question, which we want all of you to join, or to share, or to answer or reflect, which is what Imara asked. Now what? How are we living the things that we are asking? And there's an answer here. Alexis is specifically thinking about the governance based on consent. When one person say like, no, I'm not in agreement with something that's happening. So what's the response? That not our government, not just our government, but our structures, our organizations, our institutions, us as people, like I think, which I think is the people that we've been talking and experiencing, and expanding this work of transformative justice. We've been asking this for a long time. How are we including, which sounds good. Oh, Imara says it's like, yeah, let's include everybody. But the person from last week that did something to me, and I want to hit him. But you're telling me in this new word we cannot hit people. A couple of punches. So what are we gonna do with these people? And the people from Transformative Justice will say like, oh, we can talk it and think about it. Oh no, fuck, I don't want to talk to that. I just wanna hit him. And it's like, no, that in the new world that's not queer. It's like, no, yeah, that's queer. That's queer to jump somebody. Like, yeah, I just hit him a couple times. That's queer too. So we have this debate, but we're living it, we're embodying it and living in a live experience in this moment. So what I'm hearing here is that what's needed is political education. So the decisions that we are making are based on a political education. It cannot just be something that's based on my liberation or that makes me feel good. But what's the political education that will prepare us and expand what we're saying and talking about? How do we learn from what has happened? And also, if it's accessible for everyone. It's not enough, again, that we have these conversations and we're using words that people don't know, that we're saying that they're more affected by the systems and they don't know these words. So is it accessible for everyone or only for a few? How are we recreating the ways that we are experiencing? So those are the things that I thought about. So the question for people, the people from which we began this conversation. So now what? Now what? Based on what you understand and what we just talked about, what's possible now? So I'm looking at Gia, Matice, Kalayo, Imara, Alexis, después you hear M. And if there's someone else that also wants to, oh, we passed our time. Oh, let me look at my chat. If someone granted me 5 minutes, let me look. Okay, no. Okay, so let me just, if there's very quick, if there's someone that's very excited, let's take 1 or 2 people, and then I will pass it back to Mara so we can finish with the physical practice and this conversation. So I'm looking if someone, what now? What now? That's the question to close this conversation. And then M, you will give us our full closing. Matice says M.
yo no sé cómo decir en español
I don't know
voluntold.
how to say voluntold.
Yes. What am I being voluntold for?
para poder...
Closing thoughts.
Sí.
Closing thoughts. Yes, my closing thoughts are that this was amazing. Thank you so much. I am very interested in continuing to be in conversation, I think particularly around how do we build community to support the development of our emerging queer politic, right? Because I think that it's hard to do it alone. And that's been one of the beautiful things about this experience. And so I look forward to building more community to grow my politic.
Gia, por favor, y después M.
Gia and then M.
No, sorry. I thought I was just going to take it over for the physical movement. So back to M.
I just want to thank everybody for the conversation. I found it rich. I look forward to continued struggle around it. I think that our praxis has to be iterative. So we have to be practicing these things, discussing them, reevaluating them. And I think that's part of the queer practice. So just love and power. And I have every vote of confidence that we're going to win.
Y perdón, yo sé que Alexis...
And I'm sorry, I know that Alexis was brought into the conversation. I don't know if you had something to say, so then I can pass it back to Gia. If you had any words that you want to share.
The only thing I want to say is I'm so grateful for this conversation, and the question that I put in the chat feels like following up on the invitation of Imara specifically to shift into what does embodiment look like for us? What does it look like to, like, who do we have to become, right? In order for, in our individual lives, in our organizations, in our institutions, in order to be able to hear when someone is out of consent and to adapt, to be able to like address those blind spots. Like we have to get good at that. And I think I would love to be in a conversation about what are the other things that we have to get really good at doing as individuals, of recognizing our impulses to shut something down, to say no, to like combat when somebody says, I am out of consent. This does not meet my needs, and I get to be seen and my needs get to be met. Like for us to thrive, for us to have this thriving world, this vision of this thriving world that we deserve, all of us get to have our needs met simultaneously, and our needs are not in conflict with each other. So how do we get good at like trying to stay in the language of like not what we're fighting against, right? But fighting for. So how do we get good at like making more room and more space to hear needs and to be okay with like realizing in that moment of hearing someone else's needs that this is showing a blind spot in me that I didn't know was there, and to say thank you and to make space for the needs to be met.
Lo que tú dijiste me emocionó.
Yeah, what you said excited me and scared me at the same time. So I think it's perfectly what we need. Thank you so much.